What's up everyone? In today's video, I'm going to be setting up a brand new Matthews VXR 28. I actually ordered a VXR 31.5 way back in January, but amongst everything that's going on in the world right now, I have not gotten it yet. Thankfully, I'm a bow technician at the Shields in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the guys there are kind enough to let me demo out this brand new VXR 28. So basically what I'm going to do today is just walk you through the whole process, what I do to set up and tune my bows from start to finish. Now this video isn't going to be quite as in-depth as I had planned to do it, but if I get enough interest and enough comments, people tell me that they like this stuff, I'm going to do a step-by-step detailed explanation for every single part of this process. So if you guys would be interested in that, just let me know by leaving a comment below and let me know and I can do that. Let's get rolling. The first thing I'm going to do is actually set the D-loop. You know, normally when I'm working in a shop, or most people working in a shop, you'll have a 90-degree tool you can clip onto the string here, and it'll show you exactly where you need to put that D-loop. You'll just line it up with the burger button hole, which is the hole that you screw the bolt into on your rest. But for this instance, all we got to do is put the bow in a press, and if we got a level, I can lay this on the string and see that, you know, that's pretty darn close to being level. What I'm going to do is just knock my arrow, and I'm going to use that almost as a plumb. If you can see here, I've got the arrow set. Our string's level, our arrow is 90 degrees straight to the ground. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to tie in knock sets. Now I've done about every variation of this. You know, I've tied in just straight D-loops, knocking points on just the top, just the bottom. The best and most consistent knocking point that I found throughout the years has always been knocking point on the top and the bottom, and then the D-loop around both of them. A couple reasons I do that. For the main reason, I can take that D-loop off and put a new D-loop on without ever moving anything or being worried about anything moving in the first place. Second reason, it eliminates pretty much all the knock pinch as long as you tie it in tight and get your gap right. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in the top right here. So stretch out about 18 inches of BCY 3D material. I like some kind of a lighter material for the knock sets if I can, you know, whatever your favorite color is. Last year's bow I did green. This year I'm going to do white. The reason I do that, hunting wise, this is going to be a hunting bow. I want to be able to see where I need to knock that arrow, especially if it's low light situation or if I need to knock another arrow for a follow-up shot or whatever the case may be. So we start at the top, and I'm going to go right up against that knock. And what I'm going to do is just a basic crossover knot, but I'm going to wrap it twice. So once, twice. I'm going to pull that tight, right against the top of the knock. Very important to get these knots tight. Now I tied the first knot on the top, so what I'm going to do next is rotate around to the bottom. I'm going to wrap it once, twice. I'm going to pull that up right against the string, right against this first knot. Wrap it, pull it tight. Okay, that's two. Go to the top. I'm just going to alternate these knots back and forth, top, bottom, and it'll lay a nice clean knock set for the very top knot. Notice how clean those look on there. They're right up against each other. They're snug against each other. There's no visible gaps. Everything's right up against each other. That way there's nothing that's going to move after I shoot it for a while. Cut those tag ends about a 1/4 inch long. So I'll just take a lighter, burn those ends down. Maybe. Alright, got our other lighter. Burn that down. Come on, knock the arrow for a second. Okay. So I did 6 knots on the top. Now normally on an average bow I'm going to tie 4 knots on the top. The reason I did 6 is because of this short axle to axle, the string angle is going to be extremely tight. So I want a little bit bigger gap when I put my knots on my D-loop on there. That way that string isn't so pinched so sharp against my face when I come into anchor. It'll just give me a little bit more room in there, make it easier to be more consistent without string pressure on my face. So go ahead and we'll knock that arrow back on there. Okay, push it right up against those top knots. Everything's good and tight. Okay, and I'm just going to take another piece of that string and I'm going to pull that out, you know, another 18 inches or so. It's very important to get the gap right when you're tying this bottom knock set. If you tie it too close, you're gonna have a knock pinch. With these short axle to axle bows like this one here, we're gonna actually have to have a little bit bigger gap on that bottom knock set to prevent that knock pinch from happening. So there'll actually be a gap in there at rest, and that knock will be able to wiggle up and down, but when you actually draw back, that knock will sit in the exact same position every single time, but the string will not pinch the knock, so the knock will not raise up and down on the rest. So I've got the knot tied here, and I'm pulling it right in the correct position. And if you look really close, I've got just barely less than 1/8 of an inch gap right there. Okay, so I pull that knot really tight. Very good. Now you'll notice, like I said, you can move that knock up and down in the string right now. With that said, when you get to full draw, there will be no movement on that string from that knock at all. That knock will be locked in place, but that gap gives me enough room that it's not going to pinch that arrow and lift the arrow off the arrow rest or make any inconsistencies in the shooting. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tie the D-loop on there. I personally like to use the BCY number 23 Spectra. So it's a little bit thinner stuff than the number 24, which is what's most commonly used at most bow shops across the nation. But this stuff, for whatever reason, for me, it lasts almost twice as long, and I like the soft palatability of it. You know, the number 24 stuff is just a little bit thicker and harder material, and I feel like it can induce a little bit more torque on the string. I like to be able to have my D-loop not overly long, but when I twist my hand on a handheld release, I don't want it to torque the string. So I actually like the actual length of my D-loop on the string to be about 3/4 of an inch. So to start with that, I'm just going to cut off roughly 5 inches on the D-loop cord. First thing I do is I'll actually burn down just one end here. So on the 23 stuff, you don't have to mushroom down the end like you do the 24. You just slowly burn it. That's going to keep the knots from pulling through after we tie them. Okay. Flatten that out with just a flat part of the lighter there. Now, always, always, always start on the top side. Okay. Now, for a right-handed bow or for a left-handed bow, lay the sight side down on a table or keep it in the press like this. It's always going to start on this side of the bowstring. So put it on this side of the bowstring, go down, you're going to cross over your D-loop cord, go underneath your string, and put it back through that hole that you just made right there. Just like that. Okay? So I've got that knot tied. I'll pull it right up against the knock set. And I'm actually going to pull that tight. Okay, so the next we're going to go to the bottom side, so we do the exact opposite. So the first time we started on this side of the bowstring, now we're going to start on the back side of the bowstring, just like this. Go down, we made this loop right here, so we're going to put that string back through it. We can kind of pull our slack up so we've got more to work with. Then we bring this part of the string and we come over the bowstring. Okay, when we come over the bowstring, we now have a loop here. We cross underneath and put it back through that loop, just like that. Okay, and I'll put that up right next to the knock set. Now the knots aren't tight yet, so what I'll do is I'll take that arrow off, set that down, and I'll grab my knock set pliers, and I want to make sure these knots are lined up right where I want them against those knock sets. I'll actually put those pliers in there, and I'm going to pull so that that D-loop is roughly 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so that might be just a hair under 3/4 of an inch, which is fine, because actually what we're going to do is cut that extra D-loop off right there and burn it down. So, cut that off, turn it up, take my lighter, I'm going to burn that end down. Just like that. Smash it down. Okay, and then I'll just take my D-loop pliers again and I'm going to pull it tight. Alright. So that's about as tight as I can get it. Those knots are not coming loose. Those knock sets are tied in place. They're not budging. And that's how you tie in a perfect knock set. All right, so we've got the knock set and the D-loop tied in and in place. Now before we go applying any accessories on or putting any accessories on, the next thing that I'm going to do is check the cam timing and the cam sync. Okay, now this is often confused by most people because they think cam timing and cam sync are the exact same thing, and although they go together, they're not the same thing. Okay, so cam timing is actually the cam position at rest. So on Matthews, on these bows here, they have small holes in the cams right here that line up with those cables as they come down and cross the cam. For a bow to be in time, basically what that means is that the cams are in the correct position at rest. So since this is a binary cam bow here with the floating yoke system on both the top and the bottom, we want the cables to run right through the center of the timing marks on both the top and the bottom cam. This usually gets us pretty close for cam sync, but cam sync is different. Cam sync is actually the stops on the mods coming around on both the top and the bottom cam and contacting those cables at the exact same time. Okay, so just because the bow is in time does not mean that the bow is in sync. In sync is more important and can lead to a lot easier tuning if you have it set up correctly from the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bow out of the press and I'm going to put it over on my homemade draw board. So let's go along and do it. Alright, so just real quick here, this is my homemade draw board. This is nothing fancy, nothing special. Anybody can go out and make this. I spent like, I don't know, 10-15 bucks on it. I mean, other than the crank was like 20. But basically, I've just got a 3/4 inch pipe screwed into a flange that I screwed into a 2x6 here. And I've got a ruler on it so I can measure my draw length. And basically this is just lightweight winch, and you know, preferably you'd have a little thicker rope so that you don't have to crank so much on there, but I just had paracord, so that's what I put on there to use. So basically what we're going to do with this is we're going to put the Matthews VXR on the peg, attach the hook onto the string, and we're going to crank that bow back until both of these stops, you can see that there, that's one stop, and then this is the other stop right there. Okay, we got to draw that back, and we're going to check to see if both of those stops come around and hit those cables at the exact same time. So basically that'll mean that the bow is in sync. So let's put her on the draw board and find out. Got it clipped there. What we're going to do is slowly draw it back. Okay, I'm going to grab the GoPro here. So as you can see, if you look real close right there, that bottom stop is touching the cable. But if we go to the top stop right there, we've got a clear gap between that stop and that cable. So what we've actually got to do, the top cam is slow and the bottom cam is fast. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. We could either take a half a twist out of the top cam or put a half a twist into the bottom cam. Generally I like to put twist into the string because it's easier and more consistent to control. So we're going to start off by, let's see, judging by that gap, we're going to start off by putting a full twist right here into this bottom cam. Carefully let it off. We're going to take it back over to the bow press, and we're going to put that full twist in that bottom cable. Okay, again, our top cam was slow because we had a gap between our top stop and our cable. So what I'm just going to do, so I'm going to add a twist into this bottom cable. Okay, I'll let that down. We'll go put it back into the draw board. Put our safety catch over it just in case. Draw it back. Man, that's about perfect. As you can see right there, that stop, there's just a tiny, tiny, tiny gap between that stop and that cable. And if we come up here to this top, right there, we've almost got an identical gap right there. Meaning that those cams are in the exact same position, meaning that those cams are perfectly in sync with each other, which is exactly what we want. Also, I've got the yardstick here to measure the draw length. So you can see it's just a hair under 29. It's pulling roughly 28 7/8, 28 3/4 roughly. So basically how that's measured, I know I said that I've got 28.5 inch mods on here. How that's measured, this is measured ATA style, not IBO. ATA style is the same across all bows. We'll measure it right there from the very back of the grip, okay? And we'll measure it right here to the pivot point of the string, and we'll actually add 1 3/4 inches to that. When we do that, that gets our draw length the exact same no matter what bow we're shooting. So if we're shooting a Matthews one year, a Hoyt the next, maybe a PSE, we're not changing anything, okay? A lot of bow companies will want to measure from the front of the riser, that way they can get more speeds, because obviously that's not 1 3/4 inches from the back of the handle to the front of the handle. So if you measure from the front of the riser, it's going to be a lot closer to that 28.5 that the Matthews advertised. So just a little trick for you to measure your draw length to make sure it's exactly the same when you're going from bow to bow between your bow setups. All right, so after we got our cams in sync and the cams are all timed, next thing that we're going to do is install the arrow rest. So I've got the Hamskea Trinity arrow rest. It's new for this year, and it's a limb driver rest. I've ran a lot of different rests over the years. QAD's always been good for me. Ran an AAE Pro drop last year that was given to me from a friend. This year trying out the Hamskea Trinity, mostly because of the fact that it's full containment. My AAE actually broke the cage on it, and it's had a tough season. So I just wanted to upgrade something, wanted something that still had the micro adjust. You know, also it's got the custom engraving bow only on there, so can't beat that. And that's nothing special. I mean, anybody can order that off their website. But it looks like right here, real close, that rest is too far to the right. So I'm actually going to grab my Allen wrench here, loosen that up so I can shift that over before I tighten it down. We'll stop with it right there, and then I'm actually just going to tighten down that bolt. And I want that rest to be pretty much level on there. Okay, now also you'll notice on this rest, it's got a guided slot right here. So I can either slide it forward or back. And I'm not going to get too in depth on that on this video, but having that rest more forward or far back basically is an adjustment for torque tuning. Torque tuning is essentially setting the adjustment of your rest and your sight further out and closer to the center of your grip, basically so that if you do torque, or when you do torque, if your hands are cold, you're wearing gloves, whatever the case may be, your pin movement is exactly the same, and it matches the amount that that arrow comes out of the bow differently. So if you're torquing the bow, obviously the arrow comes out a little different, but at the same time those sights are moved different also. So if we can match those up and get those to tune together, better off you're going to shoot. General rule of thumb that I've personally found on all the bow setups that I've done, the closer the rest is to the center of the grip, the closer the side housing needs to be to the riser to get it to torque tune. So I'm probably not going to do that in this video, but just a little tidbit of information there. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments below. So once we got the rest where we want it, we're going to go ahead and tighten down that bolt pretty tight. Now remember, it's an aluminum riser and that's a steel bolt, so you can strip it out, but thankfully those threads are pretty big. You're not going to run into a lot of issues there. A lot of what I've noticed about putting these rests on the Matthews lately, the set screw that comes on the rest is going to miss the riser right there. So it's not necessarily a necessity. If you get that bolt tight enough, it's never going to budge. I've never had one budge. I've always got it tight enough. Like I said, I've never ever had one move. So just because that set screw right there doesn't touch the riser, I don't think I'm going to have any problems with it whatsoever. So Another thing I want to talk about too is I feel like people are afraid to set up their bows because they feel like it takes so much different gear and all this different stuff to set it up and level the rest and all that. And I'm just going to show you here real quick how I like to center shot my rest. I don't use any levels, any tools really. Heck, I don't even use a tape measure. I literally just eyeball it. And I'm just going to kind of describe to you how I do that here. So obviously once we get that rest screwed on and this launcher blade is holding the arrow up, I'll knock an arrow on my knocking point. And what I'm going to do, let me grab this Allen key here because I know I'm going to need to adjust it. Loosen that up, loosen this up. First thing I do is I take my bowstring and I line it up in the bottom track of the bottom cam. So it's perfectly in a straight line in the track of that cam, and I adjust that arrow rest until that center of that arrow is looking straight down the middle of the string when the string is in line with the bottom cam track. Now that's not the end be all, but it's a darn good place to start. I used to do it by just eyeballing, looking down the center of the grip, lining the string up on the center of the grip and then moving the arrow to it. But just working on everybody's bows over the years, I found it to be a lot more accurate and easier to tune, or closer anyway, when I line up that string in the bottom track, or the bottom cam in the center of the track there, and then line the arrow up with that. So when I look down it like this, that's pretty darn close. So good place to start anyway. We'll tighten the left and right. Next thing I do is I visually check the up and down. So when I look at that, right now it's just a tad high. So I'm going to loosen that bolt and I'm going to move it down just a little bit. Okay, so if you can see that, that's a pretty darn good place to start. I mean, it literally just eyeballed it. That's roughly 90 degrees to the string right there. You know, like I said, I'm just eyeballing it to start, but you don't tune bows by using levels and measurements and stuff like that. You tune the bow to how it shoots. So I'm going to set up this bow and I'm going to shoot it through paper. I'm going to Bareshaft tune it amongst some other tuning variables, but it doesn't have to be measured perfectly. If it says it needs to be, you know, 13/16 from the riser or whatever the measurement is, depending on the bow, that's a good place to start. You can achieve that by eyeballing it and then shoot it and then make your adjustments from there. Everybody shoots a bow just a little bit differently. If your grip's right, that arrow should line up right down the center of the rest. But with that said, sometimes if the spacers are a little bit out of place on the limbs, or one limb's a little bit weaker than the other, sometimes those cams can be shifted a little bit outside, and that arrow rest might sit a little bit outside. If that arrow rest has to sit inside to tune, you definitely need to move the spacers or swap limbs or whatever it takes to get that arrow rest either center down the middle of the riser or a little bit to the outside. So really simple, honestly. I'm just going to tighten those down. Okay, so that's a good place to start. I'll take my arrow off. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over to the bench and I'm going to tie the cord in. I'll show you how to do that real quick. Alright, so once we got the center shot on our rest, we got to tie the cord in to the bottom limb down here. So this is a limb driven rest. Instead of being tied into the cable like a QAD would or any other cable driven rest, this cord's actually going to come down and tie in on that bottom limb. Now you'll notice on the ham skis there's actually a spring on there to help keep that movement out. If you're hunting and you snag that cord on something, it doesn't rip it out and your rest is up and it ruins your hunt. Actually, what they've designed this year is this quick I don't know what you would call it, but it's a quick slide essentially. You don't need any Allen wrenches, no tools or anything. I can twist it, slide it down the string and re-pull it tight. So if I'm on a hunt, elk hunt in the mountains, I don't have any of my stuff, it's all back at the truck, but the truck's 10 miles away, I can just take that, slide it and pull it back down tight, and I'm off and good to go again. I don't need to go back to the truck and grab an Allen wrench. I don't need to take an Allen wrench with me, so pretty slick. So tie that on there. First of all, we'll undo that. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit more slack up here next to the rest, just because I want more adjustment there. I just want to have extra just in case something were to happen, right? So what I've been doing for tying these on is instead of actually tying it to the limb here itself, I've actually been tying it around the axle of that bottom cam. So I'll just put it right between the limbs around that cam, and I'm just running a half hitch knot is all I'm doing. So 1/2 and over. And all I do is pull this tight. Okay, so I cut that knot down. And I'm actually going to burn that knot because I don't want it slipping through. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to pull that tight all the way onto the limb, or the axle of that bottom cam. I pull it pretty tight because I don't want it coming loose. I don't want it going anywhere. And gosh, that gives me plenty of room up here, so I'll actually retie that as well. Now it's pretty easy to adjust this. All I've got to do is actually take that rubber band on there, slide it down, just like that, and I can pull that cord tight. Notice how it pulls that spring on the rest tight. That rest launcher's all the way down. That quick connect there, it's pinching that cable to keep it from sliding back up. And then just as extra security, I can take that rubber band and slide it up over right onto there. And literally it's as simple as that. So rest is all the way in the down position right there. This is after the center shot and everything. And it's tied in, it's good to go. You know, like I said, if I'm going hiking in the mountains and I catch this string and it pulls it, comes loose, something happens, instead of having to hike back, grab an Allen wrench, or taking an Allen wrench with me, I can actually just take this, retie it, and slide it up or down. It's as simple as that. It's basically toolless. So super, super handy. Another benefit of that is if you feel like your rest got bumped or moved, you can lift that up. The launcher pad will lift up. You can put your arrow on there. And using that method I showed you of how to center shot your arrow rest, you'll be able to look and see that, oh yeah, the rest got bumped, or no, it looks like it's pretty darn close. So just another little tip there for you. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is actually set up the sight on the bow. So this is pretty simple for the most part. Basically, I'm going to show you how to set up the first and second axis along with the third axis without using any special tool other than just a simple torpedo level. So first of all, I'm just going to screw this sight down on here. This is a black gold Ascent Verdict, nothing fancy. There's no micro adjust really. It's all just loosen and slide it. This one's actually a 3-pin slider. I typically like to run a 5-pin slider. I just like having 20 to 60 fixed pins for hunting. But being that this is a short-term bow for me and I'm mainly just going to use it for turkey season, 20, 30, 40, we gosh plenty. I shouldn't have to adjust the slider on that. I mean, heck, I don't like shooting turkeys further than 10 yards anyway. So, all right, so we got our sight tightened down on our riser. Okay, so let me just explain to you just real quick what first, second, and third axis is. First axis is the plane of how the sight sits against the riser. Second axis is pretty much just setting that level so that when the bow, from the limb pocket to the limb pocket, and from the string right here, when everything there is level perfectly straight up and down, that level on that sight should sit right in the very middle. Now if it's off left or right and you're leaning the top of your bow left or right because of that level on your sight, if your bow's tuned properly, that arrow is going to drift off to whatever side you're tilting the top cam to. Third axis is the last thing, and you know, for bow hunters I think it's probably the most important thing. It's often overlooked, and you know how most people set it up and how, you know, how shops do it and everything like that. You put it basically in a level and you set it level to the world, but that's not how third axis should be set. Third axis needs to be set on the bow at full draw when the shooter's holding the bow, because basically what third axis is, if you look at it, I'll just show it right here. Third axis is the pivot of the sight out like that or in. Okay, so if we're shooting at, you know, 40 yards up a hill, or if we're shooting at 20 yards really severe angle, you know, obviously when we're angling down like that, if that scope or that sight housing is angled towards us or angled away from us, that bubble is either going to go to the left or to the right. And when we see that, especially in a pressured moment like that, we're going to naturally tilt that bow to level it up. And you know, that can throw our shot off by quite a few inches, even in close distance. So as a bow hunter, that's very, very important. I'm going to show you how to set all of these just real quick. Let's head upstairs and we'll get right to it. Okay, so there's a couple different options here. What I'm doing right now is I'm setting the second axis. Thankfully, I've got a bow vise here at the indoor range here at the Platte Valley Archery Club. And I've got it in there, and I took the torpedo level and I put it against the string, and I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but that level is almost right in the very middle. The bubble's right in the middle of the level right there. And if you can see the bubble on the sight, the bubble is just slightly on the right hand side of it. So basically what that tells me is that that second axis is slightly off. So I went ahead and I loosened up those screws right there, and basically all I've got to do is make a slight adjustment. Very slight. Now let's double check it here. That might have been too much. It's very finicky. Okay, level's level, and the sight bubble's a little bit on the left. Move it back just a touch. Let's see. Man, that's about as perfect as you get right there. The bubble is both in the middle on the sight and on the torpedo level, which is right against the string. So if the string's level, theoretically, the riser is straight up and down along with the string, and the sight against the riser is level. And if the sight's level, everything's going to be dropping in a perfectly straight line as long as we do our part tuning. So a couple things I'd like to add here. If you don't have a bow vise or you don't have a way to hold your bow like this, what you can do is you can hang it up in a bow hanger and basically just use your hand to adjust it, put the level against the bow and hold it till it's level while it's hanging, and then look at the sight to kind of see which adjustment you have to go. Take it off, make your adjustment, put it back up, double check, just kind of go back and forth figuring it out. Another thing you can do is just put it in a door jamb. Just use that as 90 degrees and set it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these screws down, and then I'll show you how to set the third axis. Okay, so after we've got our first and second axis set, this is my favorite way to set the third axis. It's really simple. All you need is basically a plumbing string. So what I did is I just took some high-vis paracord and tied a knot in it, hung it from the bow hook, and just tied a roll of tape on the bottom of there. So that means that that string there is perfectly plumb with the earth. And what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to take those pins on that sight and I'm going to level them. I'm going to put them right on that green string at a really steep downward angle, and I'm going to visually check my bubble and see which way that bubble is, because basically if that string is plumb, right, and my 3 pins that I've got there are lined up perfectly on that string, it should still be level. If it's not still level, that tells me that this side housing is either flexed in or flexed out one way or the other. So the reason you have to do this at full draw is because of the natural torque that happens when you draw the bow back. Because, you know, right now those cables are pulled to the side and it's under a little bit of pressure, but when you draw that bow back, that bow is going to naturally twist just a little bit in your hand. So as long as you're consistent in your shot and you're very specific when you aim and check the level on this process, you can get the third axis set just perfectly. So I always put an arrow in it just in case I don't want to dry fire it. You know, obviously I don't want to shoot into the wall, but also on this release, this is the Stand Perfects resistance release, and with the trainer lock system, it's not going to go anywhere. So it's basically bulletproof as long as I don't relax the release out of my hand. So I'm going to draw back, I'm going to aim down at the string and take a look and see which way the bubble's facing. So it's very important to draw back and anchor level. Okay, I'm going to go down. Okay. So when I do that, the bubble is on the left-hand side of the side housing, which tells me that that side housing here is too far in, right? Because as I go down, that bubble goes to the left. So basically what I need to do, there's a little screw right here. I'm just going to give that a little bit of a turn, about 1/8 of a turn, and see what it looks like. But before I do that, I'm just going to double check it one more time. Okay, so it's the same that time, so all I'm going to do is adjust that screw just a little tiny bit. Okay, so that was a fair amount of adjustment. Let me try that again. That's perfect right there. So when I come to full draw, the bubble is level when I put it on the string when I'm aiming level with the ground, and when I angle severely down, that bubble's lining up dead center too, which tells me both my first, second, and my third axis is completely set. So I've got that set for now. We're going to go into starting putting in the peep sight and tuning for draw length, stabilizer, stuff like that. And once we get all that stuff set up, everything tuned, we're just going to come back, double check it, and make sure it's the same after we add a bunch of stabilizer weight. So moving on to the next. Alright, so now that we've got our rests on, our sight on, we've got our first, second, and third axis set. I'm going to fire a couple of arrows down range, just adjust the sight housing and get it close. That way I can kind of have a rough idea where I need to put that peep sight. We'll run downstairs, throw the peep sight in, and go from there. So shoot the first arrow out of it. Wow, that's quiet. It's shooting to the left about 6 inches and just a touch high, so it's not far off at all. Closer, needs a little bit more. Also notice on a brand new bow, brand new string, generally the string, especially if it's a solid color, it'll have a split in the strands right there. So it's very important to leave that in there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use that as a reference for where I need to put my peep sight when I go downstairs, put it in the press, and throw that peep in. So when I draw back this time, I'm just going to kind of look at that blurry as I look past and kind of see if it's way high, way low, and where roughly I need to put that peep sight. And that was right on right there. So look like the peep sight's going to line up just ½ inch down below that. So I'm going to head back downstairs and put it in the press, tops the peep sight in, come back up here and kind of fine tweak that. So let's roll. So I'm running a 3/16 peep sight. With this short axle bow, that string puts that peep sight further out away from my face. So having that 3/16 there, normally I shoot an 1/8. So having that 3/16 there will give me just a little bit more area there. Help me line up a little bit better on my sight. So basically what I'm going to do here is just split my string. Okay, once I got it split, I'm actually going to take my release off so it's not banging around. Once I've got that split, I'm going to slide it down just a little bit to where I believe that peep needs to be, or at least a good starting point. So right there seems about okay. Perfect. Just like that. Actually, what I'll do, that's just a little tip for you. What I like to do is I take a little piece of thread, and I'll just take the piece of thread that was in it. And since that string is already split perfectly right down the middle, I don't want to have to take the time to count through all that again if I ever have to take that peep out and I lose my place. So I'm just going to slip this piece of serving right through there, and I'm going to pull it all the way up the string right towards the top, so it's out of my way, but it's there if I absolutely need it. And that way, when it ends up selling as a used bow, then whoever gets it, they can have it set up right down the middle. Nobody has to count the strands. It's just easier. It saves time. So take that and we'll let it down. Looks like the peep is sitting just a little bit crooked. So what I'm going to do is put just a half a twist in that string. Press it again. Take the bottom string off. Pull that out. Half of a clockwise twist. Okay. So that's still twisting just a little bit, but let's go upstairs, shoot a few shots through it, and see if it needs to go up or down or whatever direction it needs to go. I'm just going to send a couple shots down range, kind of see how that peep sight's lining up for me. Peep sight right now is low for me, so I'm going to put it back in the press, slide that peep up, do whatever twist I need to do, come back up, shoot again. All right, gonna give her a try again. I move that peep up, flipped it around so it comes back so I can see through it. That felt pretty good right there. Let me shoot another one through just real quick. That feels really good. I'd say that peep is pretty much right there, exactly where I want it. For now, I'm not going to tie it in right away. There's a few other things I want to do first. Right now, the sight is hitting exactly where I want it to, but after we go through the tuning process, paper tuning, Bareshaft tuning, amongst some other things, if we do have to raise or lower that sight, I don't want to have to cut off the thread from the peep sight being tied in to move it and adjust it. So for now, we're just going to leave that peep sight in the string where it's at, and it's not going to move as we shoot or anything. It should be just fine. So we're going to leave it be and move on to the next step. All right, so the next step that I personally do is basically tweak the draw length for the best, most steadiest hold. Now, for the average guy, for the average bow hunter out there, you don't need to do this. This is just a little bit overboard, but for me, I want the bow to be as forgiving as possible and to hold the steadiest and just allow me to shoot as best as I can. So I know this is only a 28-inch axle-to-axle hunting bow. With that said, I want to shoot it as good as possible. For this process, basically, we haven't done any tuning yet. The stabilizers aren't on. We just have the peep sight set along with the rest and the sight. Rest is just eyeballed, of course. And basically what we're going to do is, as we're aiming, we're going to kind of pay attention to that blurry pin movement and see what's happening. So basically, if the draw length is too long, the pin moves extremely slow, right? It's really slow, really droopy. However, if it's too short, that pin is really fast and jerky. It stays in the middle, but then it jerks out really fast. Whereas if the draw length's too long, again, it's slow and whoopy. It goes out and stays out a little bit longer. It doesn't come back to the middle quite as fast. But I like to have it just in the very best position I can have it be, which usually takes a little bit of adjusting. I haven't shot a bow this short of axle to axle before, so generally I run a 28-inch mod, which is what I run on my verdicts. But I twisted the cables up just a little bit, got it a little bit further, so the draw was actually about 28 3/4. This one's drawn 28 and 7/8, excuse me. So it is just 1/8 of an inch longer. So I'm just going to do a little bit of testing, kind of see what the pin movement looks like for me. And that one fell right on. I've got a little bit of left and right movement, but that's just because I don't have any front stabilizer weight out quite yet. So take a few more shots. Okay, so just a quick side note here. As I'm shooting, I'm noticing then that peep sight feels just a fuzz low, which is a good reason why another reason why I don't tie it in right away. So I'm just going to move that up just a fuzz. Don't slide your peep sight in your string if you're moving it a long ways or anything like that. Brand new string, this is a good peep, there's no sharp edges on it. I can move it 1/8 of an inch, it's not going to damage anything. So, move that up. Pin float's looking good for me so far. Just going to take a few more shots here. Awesome. So, the pin float is extremely good. It's not really fast, it's not slow, it's right in between. I mean, obviously it's not sitting dead center middle, but it feels really good for me. If you're doing this for your bow setup, take quite a bit of time to do it, especially if you haven't done it before, because just playing with the adjustments and trying it and shooting it and kind of seeing what it feels like, seeing what the pin movement looks like, it makes a big difference. It's very important to do this without the stabilizers, because the stabilizers, we want to add that after the draw length has been set perfectly, just because the peep, the stabilizers, the holding weight, all that stuff, it all kind of plays together. If we can get the draw length right first, then we can set up the stabilizers better because of that. So pretty much got everything set here. I'm not going to adjust the draw length at all on this. If I were to do that, basically what I would do is I'd either twist up the string, this piece here, if I needed a lot of adjustment, twist both the top and the bottom, or if I needed just a small adjustment to make it a little bit longer, I would add twists to these cables, which would either speed up or slow down the timing of the top and bottom cam just a little bit, not really causing any problems, or I would take twists out to make the draw length just a little bit shorter. Like I said, it's good where it's at right now, so we're going to throw some stabilizer bars on and play with that a little bit, see how steady we can get this rig to feel. The next thing I'm going to do is add the Matthews 2-piece quiver on here. So I just demoed this out to give it a try, and we'll toss it on. We'll do that before we put the stabilizers on, or as we put the stabilizers on, I guess you could say. That way we can kind of set those stabilizers up for the feeling of it with the actual quiver on the bow. So this is a super light quiver. I've not shot with one on my bow before. I've shot friends' bows with them, and I really like it. It's a really lightweight quiver. I just like the fact that I can take my tight spot quiver off. With that said, I'm going to give this a go, at least for turkey hunting for the next few weeks or a couple months anyway, and see how I like it. Alright, well, we got our bars on, no weights yet. Got the weights with me, and got my release and extra weights, Allen wrench, all that. We're gonna head back upstairs and start shooting. So basically what I do to set up my stabilizers on my hunting bow, and I won't get into too much detail on this, I'll try to keep it kind of straightforward and simple, but basically I start with no weight on the bars at all, and I slowly add weight to the front until that pin movement left to right is completely eliminated. So I'll add on weights, 4 ounces to start, add 1, add 2, keep adding them until it completely gets rid of that pin movement. So when I did that, I got up to about 8 ounces on the front, which is what I've got on right now. When you start adding weight like that, sometimes then that pin will start dipping down because the front's just a little bit too heavy. So then for me personally, I'll start with my back bar and I'll put it straight back, not really kicked out to the side at all. As you can see, I mean, just barely enough out of the way. And I'll slowly add weights on there, basically just to counter that. So I try not to get the back bar too heavy, because then it just kind of makes the bow heavy and the front weight on the stabilizers isn't really having the same effect. So I just slowly add a little bit of weight on the back until I get rid of that pin bob. So right now I've actually got 8 ounces on the back as well. So I've got 8 on the front, 8 on the back on both 2 10-inch bars. So it's holding really good right now. You know, this is something that you'll fine tune later down the road, but I at least wanted to get it somewhat established before I go into the tuning process. So follow along and let's do that. Now before tuning, I want to talk just a little bit about the arrows that I'm running. For this setup, I've got the 28.5-inch mods with the 65-pound mods also. I haven't put it on the scale yet, but it should be right around that 65 pounds, at least it feels like it anyway. With that said, I shoot the Easton Axis 340, and I actually cut it 27 inches long. So for most people that seems really short, but if you look at where the arrow sits on my arrow rest and on my shelf, I've got plenty of room for broadheads and everything else. Plus I've got the 50 grains of brass up front in the insert, so you know, making it a little bit weaker by adding all that weight up front, because I've got a 100 grain point plus the 50 grain insert. Cutting it just a little bit shorter makes that arrow shaft be just a little bit stiffer and matches my setup just that much better. So obviously you got to kind of play with your own setups, but that's what's worked for me. So if you've got specs really close to this, then I recommend giving it a shot. So the next thing that we're going to do is paper tuning. Now paper tuning isn't the end be all by any means. It's just a really good place to get started, and you know, after eyeballing that center shot, the paper tear should be really close, so we shouldn't really have to make a whole lot of adjustments if we do. But we'll walk up, shoot it through paper. Thankfully here at the range we actually got a paper tuner down there. I saw it when I was getting my arrows down there, so we'll go ahead and use that. Now if you're at a range or shooting in your basement or something and you don't have a paper tuner, you don't need to go out and make this super fancy paper tuning setup, because quite frankly you shouldn't spend that much time paper tuning. Basically all you really need to do is take a box and cut out about a 10-inch circle out of it, and just take a piece of paper, used paper, recycled paper, tape it on there, and shoot right through the box. So it's important that you stack it up and you're shooting level. You don't want to be shooting down or anything like that. That way your form is perfectly level. You're not angled up, down, anything like that. So it's kind of getting rid of a lot of those variables. So with that said, we're going to head down, shoot a few through paper, and see what it looks like. Now before I get started with paper tuning, I just wanted to explain a little bit about what paper tuning is and why we do it. Basically what paper tuning is we're shooting an arrow through the paper and we're checking to see that the point of our arrow and the back of our arrow are going through the same hole. Because theoretically if they're going through the same hole, that means the arrow's flying straight. If the arrow's flying straight, it should be more forgiving, right? right. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to shoot our arrow through paper, evaluate the tear, and make any adjustments for that. So here's the first shot through paper. I just eyeballed it and I threw the stabilizer weights on after some shooting. So you know, generally when I'm tuning them in the shop, if I eyeball them, they're right there as long as the cam's in sync and as long as the arrow's good. So we'll shoot one through and see what it looks like. Sweet. So it looks like we've got just a slightly low tear, meaning that the point of our arrow is high and the knock part of our arrow is low. So let me explain this just a little bit further. I'm getting a low tear right now. That would replicate this tear right here. So you can see low. So the point of the arrow is coming in up here and the knock of the arrow is going down out there. Now, this isn't my tear. My tear is a lot smaller. I just took this off the paper tuner to kind of show you what's happening. So with that said, basically if you're getting a low tear, as long as your cam's in sync, your arrows are set up correctly, everything like that is set right, there's two things we can do. We can either lower the rest down or we can raise the knocking point on the string of the bow. Okay, so let's say we had a high tear, just like that, where high tear is where the point of the arrow is going in here, down at below, and the knock point of the arrow is going out up top, just like that. Okay, so if that's the case, first of all, got to make sure we got the sync in the cams, got to make sure we've got the right arrows, all that good stuff. A couple of different adjustments you can make. You could raise the rest up, right? Or you could drop the D-loop down. So just pretty much opposite of a low tear. So let's talk a little bit about like a right tear and a left tear. Okay, so a right tear or a left tear. Okay, now this is really important to pay attention to. A lot of people that shoot compounds with releases get caught up and think that if the tear is left or the tear is right, that the spine of the arrow is off and that's what's causing the tear. And in all reality, that can have some effect, but on a compound bow with the release, that is not what's causing the left or right tear. Either the rest is not center shot correctly, you're torquing the bow. That's the #1 issue for almost 99% of people out there if they're getting a left or right or an inconsistent tear in paper. It's always the grip, almost constantly. Sometimes it's facial pressure, sometimes the D-loop's too short, and when they draw back, if they shoot a handheld and they rotate that hand, it torques that string, causing a low right tear or a high left tear, depending on a few different things. And just shooting in general, if your bow is tuning fine, but it's always left or always right, 99 times out of 100, it's usually something with the grip. So most of the time, what I find out that's happening is that people's thumbs right here and the grip of their bow is too relaxed. It's sitting too far back in their hand. They're just relaxing it too much, okay? So what I recommend, if you're getting an inconsistent tear left or right, like this in paper, try taking your thumb and pushing it further forward, right? Assuming you have a correct grip to begin with. Grip is one of those things where it's not really whatever fits you best. Like there's mainly one way to do it and very limited variations of that. So make sure you've got the right grip first of all and then play with that thumb pressure just a little bit. So again, we've got a slightly low tear, and by a slightly low tear, it's like 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop that rest down just slightly and shoot it through paper again and see what it looks like. So it's pretty good. We're getting really close right there. Go ahead and shoot another one through. Just barely a little low and to the right. A lot of that can be the stabilizer weight too, which is just another reason why I put the stabilizers on before I tune it. Oh yeah, that's clean. Let me grab the camera and show you. As you can see, that's the last couple shots right here. So we got a little bit of vertical variation, but that's okay. We'll fine tune that just a little bit later. So This here was the first tear, and we made slight adjustments from there. So until we got her down about exactly how we want it. So like I said earlier in the video, we don't tune the bow to how it looks or how it shoots through paper. We want to tune the bow to how it actually shoots downrange. So we want to make whatever adjustments to the bow we can make to make it as forgiving as possible to allow us to shoot as well as good as we can. So paper tuning is a good start to get everything close. We didn't have to make a whole lot of adjustments on there to get that a bullet hole right away, even after putting all the stabilizers on the quiver and everything else. So next thing we're going to do is Bareshaft tune. Alright, so let's talk just a little bit about Bareshaft tuning. Basically, Bareshaft tuning is just like it sounds. You're shooting an arrow without any fletchings. Okay, it's still got the point, it's still got the knock and everything else in it. We're not actually adding weight on the end to compensate for the fletchings because we're not really shooting at a far enough distance for that to matter. So we're here at the indoor range. This is just a standard 20-yard indoor range. So for now, we're going to Bareshaft tune to 20 yards. If you want to get really particular about it, you can back up to 30, even 40 yards. If you go beyond 40 yards, if you're shooting 50 yards, and if you can shoot a Bareshaft and a fletched arrow together at 50 yards, that's pretty good shooting. I'm not going to try that with this 28-inch axle bow. Don't really need to, and you don't really need to Bareshaft tune by any means. If you paper tune and you check your broadhead flight and make sure your broadhead's hit on with your field points, you can essentially be done with tuning at that point. But again, I like getting the absolute most out of my setup that I can. That's why I like to Bareshaft tune. So we're going to shoot a few arrows downrange, and I'll kind of explain the adjustments that I'll have to make for the Bareshaft. So what I'm going to do is I'll shoot one fletched, and if that shot feels good, I'll shoot one Bareshaft, and we'll go take a look and I'll explain what I'm finding. The fletched first. We did make a few adjustments on the paper tune. So sights are going to be off a little bit, but that's okay. I'll just aim at the same spot with both arrows. Alright, let's go take a look. Alright, so if you can see, I was aiming at that orange dot behind you there. And the fletched arrow felt good and the Bareshaft arrow felt good. And if you see, you can tell that the Bareshaft arrow is just slightly up and to the right just a little bit. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to shoot this again just to make sure I can repeat that shot and make sure it's consistent. And then I'll explain the adjustments. Alright, let's go check them out. Alright, you can see that the Bareshaft is just slightly high. It's not off to the right this time. It's pretty much straight above it, which tells me that between this shot and last shot, my grip was slightly different. With that said, because that Bareshaft is just a little bit high like that, I'm actually going to drop that rest down just a little bit. We're going to shoot a group of fletched arrows, and then we're going to shoot the Bareshaft into it and see how it's looking. Let's go check it out. Alright, so that's how it's hitting. Bareshaft's just hitting just a little bit high on there. So I'm just going to double check the sync of the cams and then adjust the rest down just a bit. Aha! I see the problem. Check this out. So the bottom stop is hitting perfect, and the top stop has got a very slight gap right there. So we're going to reverse that. I think I'm just going to take a half a twist right out of that top cable to fix it. Alright, let's go shoot it again. All right, so in order to get it to Bareshaft tune well, I had to really drop that rest down and did adjust the sync of the cams just a little bit on there. But because I had to drop that rest down, now I also have to move my sight down, which I just did. So that's just another reason why I don't tie in the peep almost until the very last part, because if I tied in that peep and then I had to move that sight down as much as I have from the beginning, I'd have to cut that tie off the peep and redo the entire thing. So let's shoot one more. Let's shoot 2 more fletched arrows and 1 more Bareshaft, and we'll call her good. So just a quick tip for you, something that has at least helped me over the years just a little bit. You'll notice this Bareshaft, you know, it's hitting right in there, it's close enough, but you'll notice it is hitting still just a little bit high, and that's exactly how I like to leave it, mostly because of the fact that when I put a broadhead on the front of my arrow, whatever it is, I don't know if it's the drag or just the length of it, but when I shoot a fixed blade broadhead, even mechanical broadheads, as I back up in distance, that arrow seems to fall just a little bit faster than my normal field points do. So having that Bareshaft tuned so that it hits just a little bit higher, more on the high side of my fletched group at 20 yards, usually that helps fix that just a little bit. I don't have quite as much variation between my field points and my broadheads when I go to shoot between the two. So just another little tech tip for you. So I would say those are pretty good right there. I'll give you a closer look. As you can see, they're all flying right in there. I didn't adjust the sight quite right on. They're shooting a little bit high, but they're all right in there. So can't complain about that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the bow back downstairs and tie in the peep sight. All right, so now that we got the bow all set up and tuned for the most part, we Bareshaft tuned. The Bareshaft is hitting right on with the fletched arrows at 20 yards. So that's at least as far as we can go on the indoor range here today. Everything's set up. I've got the stabilizers in a good starting position. Everything's pretty much exactly where I want it for right now, including the peep sight. So now at this point, now that we've got everything really dialed in, really close to where we want it, we'll go ahead and we'll tie in that peep sight. So I'll just put it back in the press, just so you guys can see it better when I tie it in, and I'll show you how I do it so that the peep does not move. Time to tie in the peep sight. So what I like to use is BCY power grip. This is 0.018 in diameter, so 18 thousandths. And what I like to do is I like to take out almost about a yard, probably just a little bit under a yard of string, and I'll cut it. Okay, now I always start, for whatever reason, I always start right here on this bottom side and slip it right in between the strands there, and I'll face that short strand forward. Now I'm going to start wrapping this way to the right, just because I know that that peep sight needs to turn that way a little bit. So I'll wrap it a couple times here. So I've got 3 wraps. Pull it tight just a little bit. 4, 5, 6. Pull it tight. I'll take this tag in, pull the slack out, put it back. 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I'll take that tag in and I'll put it over. What I'm going to do is back serve. So I'm coming off the bottom right now. I'll put it over the top, and I'll wrap 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Come back across. Pull it back over, undo those wraps, just like so. Grab that long tail end, pull it tight, just like that, good and firm. Okay, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread it through that side of that string, just like this, and I'm actually going to wrap it down that side of that string. And every time I wrap it, I'm pulling that tight. Notice how they're nice and even wraps. I'm pulling it tight. The purpose for wrapping it like this is for when we go and tie around the peep sight itself, because We do not want that peep sight to move. Even if that peep sight moves just a little tiny bit on a hunt, I mean, that can be the difference between killing the animal you're after or injuring or missing it completely. So after we get those wraps, you notice I went through on that side, pull it into the groove, okay? We're still wrapping this way, so I'm gonna wrap it around the peep. As I wrap, I pull it extremely tight. Okay, and then I'm going to go back through the bottom side split in the string. And I'll slide it back into that groove. Now I'm going to do the same thing down this side, and I'm just going to back serve it and call it good. So put it through there, start wrapping. So once I get to that end, as you can see, I started wrapping around 4, 5, 6, pull tight, 7, 8, pull it tight, 9, 10. Okay, now since we're coming off that back side of the string, I'm going to take the remainder of the string, put it over the top, and I'm going to wrap 4 times, just like I did on the bottom side. And then I'm going to blade it over, and I'm going to get rid of those wraps. That's back serving. Basically tying a knot with wraps already in it. So pull that tight, just like that. Okay, trim those off. Grab a lighter, then we can burn it. Sweet. And this doesn't quite have to be that long, so I might cut off just a pinch of that. We got the peep side tied in. From this point here, basically what we're going to do, I'm just going to double check, make sure that the peep's still coming back straight for me after I tie it in. Occasionally I can pull and twist that string around just a little bit, so just want to ensure that that's coming back straight. And from here on this point, everything else is pretty much fine tuning. Hope you've enjoyed the video so far, and stay tuned for what's next. Been shooting for the last couple hours, making just teeny tiny adjustments, adjusting the sight, getting up close, getting back far, and finally here, got the Bareshaft sliding consistently good with the fletch shafts at 40 yards, so take a look. There's the Bareshaft. That one was just a touch low, but they're all right in there, and I mean, for 40 yards, you can't complain about that. Wrap your hands around them. So I'm going to call that good for Bareshaft tuning. You get past 40 yards and it'd be tough to hit this target with the Bareshaft. So I'm going to call that good and start setting the sights. All right, so after all the final tweaks and after getting it Bareshaft tuned at 40 yards, in the indoor range here in the old man's shop, we're going to shoot a 300 round quick and just see how it scores. First 300 game didn't go too bad. Setting it up last night and shooting it this morning, I'd say it's doing pretty well.